Good evening and welcome back to Empty Cloud Monastery. My name is Bhante Sudaso and I'm here with Ayurveda. And this is your weekly opportunity to ask any questions that are in some way related to Buddhism. And unless we deem them to be completely off the topic of Buddhism, then we'll make some effort to give a useful reply, or at least a reply, no guarantee of usefulness. So we'll start with homage to the Buddha, and then we'll start reading through the questions and giving some responses. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami.
Okay, so we'll start saying hello to everyone who's joining. And the first question is from Anna Maria. It says, good evening. What is Venerable Buddha's daily practice nowadays? How do we practice letting go of awareness? When is Bhante Wade coming back, or how can I reach him? And also, where do monks get their names from?
Okay, well, I think you can answer the first of these questions, because I actually can't answer the first of these questions.
My daily practice? Well, actually, to be completely honest, it's been a little bit busy around the monastery recently for me. We've been doing almost every day, if not every day, actually.
Multiple times a day.
Multiple times a day, actually editing the translation in Italian of the Itivuttaka. And so that's definitely been something that's been a major thing. So editing the suttas, like a translation of the suttas that actually Ayasoma has done and rendered it into Italian. And we've been, myself and Bhante Sudaso have been going through with her remotely while she's in Italy and going through those suttas and discussing the meaning of them and discussing the various details surrounding translation and so on. So yeah, that's definitely been, I'd say, the most notable events of my recent life.
Yeah. And how do we practice letting go of awareness? You don't. Letting go of awareness sounds like a really bad idea, in fact. Actually, there is a time when you're allowed to let go of awareness, and that's when you're falling asleep at night. You're allowed to let go of awareness when you fall asleep. That's the only time.
And I think this is in reference to letting go of attachment to awareness, because it came up in the Dhamma talk the other day. Letting go of attachment towards all of our experiences. It was in this that we discussed the other day.
Well, maybe you can answer since I don't know the context that you're talking about.
Okay. It's not awareness in terms of meditation or...
Okay, then maybe you can clarify.
Okay. I assume, Anna Maria, you were talking about the other day when we were talking about, the Buddha said about uprooting the causes, the defilements that lead the mind to continue in samsara, and talking about uprooting consciousness and uprooting awareness. That's what we were talking about. And just to specify, I guess maybe also because of what Bhante was saying, that the practice he's recommending that we were discussing there is not about relinquishing awareness in terms of awareness of our mindfulness, or relinquishing our awareness in terms of our meditation practice, in the sense of we should be we're not supposed to be dulling our mind or something like that, right? In line with sleep. But the sense is rather that the Buddha's advice on this, which comes up again in the suttas again and again, is essentially that one is supposed to contemplate and understand how awareness arises and how it ceases, and so that conditional nature of awareness, and then to see in regards to it that it's impermanent, that it's dukkha, and that it's non-self. So that's what I'm referring to when I was talking about letting go of awareness, and the Buddha talking about letting go of awareness. So he says to dispel nandi and nivesana, and that's what we talked about. So dispelling relishing and settling, and then he says doing so vijnanam bhavenatite, consciousness will not remain in existence. So the sense here is that you are supposed to remove any craving or identification with awareness and understand that it's impermanent and that it naturally arises and ceases. And so when awareness ceases, it's no different than, let's say, some water fades into the atmosphere. It's nothing personal. It's just a completely natural process. So letting go of it in terms of letting go of our attachment to it so that we don't continue in the cycle of rebirth, because by attaching to awareness, and we attach to all the khandhas that it's part of. So that's what I was referring to with that. Yeah.
Okay. And it says, when is Bhante Wade coming back, or how can I reach him? Well, we don't know when he's coming back. We would like him to come back. He's a delightful monk. Currently, he's at Bhavana Society and is planning to be there for the next few months. However, he seems to like empty clouds, so he might come back in the future. I would expect as much. But one of the things with this monastery is that from the beginning we've never had permanent residents. Rather, we have monks who come and go, and ones who spend a few weeks or a few months or even longer here. Ones who come back regularly, keep appearing from time to time. The one thing that's been a constant is there's always been monks here. But the exact identity of those monks is irrelevant. The point is that the Sangha is always present. And then, where do monks get their names from? Can you explain?
Well, usually we get them given to us by the preceptors. My name was given to me by Bhante Sudasa. And Bhante Sudasa, your name was given by your preceptor, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
So often when one goes forth, when one first becomes a monk, then the preceptor will give the student a name. And there's different ways. So in Thailand, I seem to understand that they have actually a book of Pali names that they select from. And I think it's based around your birthday. And, right? Is that right, Bhante?
Yeah, the day of the week you're born on.
Yeah, so there's certain criteria that they use for finding the letter and then selecting the name. And then other times the name will just be selected based off often either a quality that the person has or an aspiration that they're aspiring for, or both. So often the name is if it's chosen in that way, it's often a kind of aspiration or a quality that they can grow or develop in the practice. It's often where the name comes from.
Okay.
And then Tillman says, the concept of causality in these days is the subject of much research. The key questions are how to define causality and how to identify it from observations. There are multiple possible definitions of causality, and empirical observations allow the identification of causality sometimes, but not always. I was wondering how to reconcile this with the Buddhist teachings that everything has a cause and an effect. As a researcher, I would say we don't know this. I wonder how Buddhists see this issue. Okay.
Yeah, well, one thing that I've often said is that there's literally only one thing in all of Buddhism which actually needs to be taken on faith. Only one. And as long as one has faith in this one thing, then the rest of Buddhist thought unfolds naturally. And the one thing is, in fact, causality. This concept that everything has a cause and an effect. This is the single and only article of faith in all Buddhism. If you believe in this principle of causality, then every other Buddhist teaching unfolds naturally from this one premise. But as you said, it's not something that you can actually prove for yourself. You can observe it in your life to a large degree. So if you pay attention, you'll notice that your experience is actually constantly manifesting cause and effect. Your experience is constantly demonstrating cause and effect. You're thirsty, so you drink some tea, and the thirst goes away. That's proof of cause and effect. You just proved it to yourself. You're tired, so you take a nap, and then you're not tired anymore. You just proved cause and effect. You slap your neighbor, and he doesn't like you anymore. You just proved cause and effect. You give your cat bad food, and your cat gets sick. You just proved cause and effect. So in reality, we're constantly, blatantly, obviously proving cause and effect to ourselves all the time. So realistically, it's actually not that giant of a leap of faith. So those are my thoughts. Do you have anything else on this?
I mean, I do, but I don't know how much I should talk about it.
If you want to add something, you can add something.
Okay.
Or not if you don't.
Okay. I mean, I guess I'm just trying to think what is the most relevant and applicable. I mean, one thing I would say is that the idea that everything has a cause and effect, the Buddhist teachings they're for a particular purpose. So, like, it doesn't really, despite what the logical conclusions and so on of the teachings may be, what the Buddha was really pointing to is he's particularly pointing to a specific relationship of conditionality, which is the Four Noble Truths. Like that's the main concern. So it doesn't actually really matter. I mean, it might on a certain degree, but the most important thing, like what the Buddha is actually, he's not asking you to prove that everything has a cause and effect. So he's not asking you to prove that. But he is saying that, he says that if someone doesn't understand the Four Noble Truths, it's impossible that they'll be able to make an end of suffering. So that actually does need to be understood. And so I would say, like on that level, if you want to understand Buddhist conditionality, Buddhist causality, there's a lot of different domains of that you can explore, but I'd say that the most relevant one, according to the Buddha himself, in terms of the discourses that we have that seem to be from him mostly and his early disciples, then really what he's emphasizing is the Four Noble Truths. So specifically, in a broad sense, it's really kind of boils down to how suffering arises and how rebirth works, basically. So there's a cause and effect relationship between our mind and our experience of the world, our mind and our life, our existence. So that's really what he's pointing to at the most fundamental level. And so if you can focus on that, I would say, inquiring into that, then you might have a better idea of how Buddhists, at least this core, the specific aspect of Buddhism, which the Buddha himself focused on, that might be relevant. Maybe.
Okay, good.
Okay.
Yeah, you can always bring it back to the Four Noble Truths. It's always relevant.
Okay, and Joseph says, Venerables, an example of developing perspective. So this is from the last question, last week. He was asking about perspective. And he says, the Christian Eucharist means thanksgiving. Now, if we're in a church, we can train in recollection of generosity. Do you have any examples like this?
Yeah, I mean, that's great. Basically, whenever you're interacting with any religion or any person, actually, should always be looking for the good, wholesome, praiseworthy qualities and aspects of that religion or that person or that system, and appreciating those good, wholesome, and praiseworthy aspects. Yeah, I mean, pretty much every religion in human existence has had something good about it. Otherwise, it wouldn't have lasted very long. Okay.
Okay. I didn't know that Eucharist meant Thanksgiving. Okay, and Victoria says, good evening, Venerables. Today I was reflecting on the multitudes of precept-breaking behaviors I participated in during my ignorant teenage years.
Sounds like standard teenage years.
Does the Buddha teach about karma that's created before knowing the Dhamma versus after learning about it? I'm curious about how it's viewed during youth when you may not know better or experimenting in life.
Well, the thing is that whenever you make any intentional action, that is creating karma. However, the degree of understanding involved does, as far as I can tell, it does affect the potency of the karma. So, for example, if you know full well that something is immoral and you do it anyway, then that involves a deliberate intention to do something that you know is immoral. So that does create a very strong karma. Whereas if you're actually just really confused and you're really not sure and you just go with your gut instinct on something, that's also problematic and it's still bad karma. But it might be a little bit less because of not understanding clearly what's good and what's bad, what's right and what's wrong. This is also why the Buddha put so much importance on the primacy of right view. Because with the development of right view, then we understand good and bad, we understand right and wrong, we understand what conditions we can create that lead to the development of wisdom and making better choices. So when thinking back on your foolish decisions from your teenage years, well, reflect on that person with compassion, because that person was foolish and confused and made bad choices. But as a result, that helped to create the conditions for you to now develop enough wisdom to look back at those years and to see the mistakes you made. And also to have the resolution to not make those mistakes again. So, will you still experience the negative consequences of your choices? Yes, you will. Yeah, that's inevitable. But now you have hopefully, you have the wisdom to stop making those bad choices and to cultivate a lot of good choices, which will then dilute the harmful consequences of your past bad choices. Okay? See what the next question is.
Okay. And Greg, looks like this is a question. Bhante, when you were teaching the Metta Sutta, there was a part of the translation I was curious about. And it looks like he's quoting, "If you can develop love towards another creature without hatred, you become a true person." What does true person mean?
I actually don't recognize this quote, but the word that's normally translated as true person is sappurisa. And so the word purisa means person. In fact, I wonder if it's related.
Probably, yeah. I think probably,
purisa, person.
I
They're
wouldn't
probably
be surprised,
related. Yeah. And the prefix sat has a couple of main meanings. One of them is true and the other is good. So sappurisa is often translated true person, but I actually think that good person is a bit better. It's a person who is morally good. The sense of true comes in that sappurisa also has the implication that a person has wisdom. Therefore, they have some understanding of capital T truth, some understanding of genuine, important truth. But the main point here is that they're a good person, a person with morality and wisdom. So, yeah, the cultivation of metta, the development of love towards all sentient beings, is something that helps you to be morally good, and also it will help you develop wisdom. So that's what this is talking about. Okay?
And Megan says, after dying, can a person choose not to be reincarnated? What does the Buddha say happens after death?
You can take this one.
Okay. Well, this is kind of a question that needs to be analyzed a little bit, because can a person choose not to be reincarnated? Yes and no, actually. Depends on what you mean by choose. So we actually, according to the Buddhist teachings, we actually do get reborn because we choose to. But choice in a different sense. So you might not want to on the surface level of your mind, but on a deeper level of your mind, you do want to actually. And so there's several factors that go into this, but the two main ones that the Buddha points out are, one is our ethical choices, our ethical moral intentions. So because we have a sense of responsibility, we have a sense of self. So because we identify with who we think we are, that means that when we make choices, we identify as the chooser. We identify as the person who made those choices. We identify as the one responsible for them. On a certain level of the mind, we identify with our choices. And so after death, as long as we're identifying with those choices, then we feel responsible for those. And we'll fare accordingly to our deeds. We'll fare accordingly in the cycle of rebirth according to the choices that we've made. Because the mind is intrinsically attached to those choices as something that it's done, as something that it's responsible for, as something that it is. So that's one aspect of it. So we actually choose, like, oh, I'm the one making choices. I did that bad thing. I did this good thing. And the mind has this low, very subtle level of attachment to its choices. And so it can't relinquish that without seeing through it. So it will continue faring according to that. And then the other aspect of this is desire. So we're attached with our desires to experiencing life, basically. We like to experience pleasant things. And we're also attached to chasing after more pleasant things and pursuing more pleasant things and pursuing comforts and pursuing safety and so on. And so we choose to pursue that as we feel is appropriate. So for example, you might feel that being born in heaven would be really nice, that's a safe place to be. So your mind will gravitate towards that. And if you've made the appropriate choices, which will allow your mind to go there, it has the appropriate conditions to match with that desire, to incline towards a heavenly rebirth, then you're going to get reborn there. So if you call that a choice, then I would say it's a choice. But if you don't consider that a choice, then you might not. You might consider it something like the nature and habit of the mind, the law of the mind. And it kind of boils down to the fact that ultimately the mind is actually not self. So although we feel that we can control our mind, if you've ever practiced meditation for longer than a minute, you'll realize that that's not the case. So our mind actually is making choices. Like, it has desires, and we can't just say no more. But it is also choosing in a certain sense that, right? So when we have like desire for things, if you call it a choice, then you could say that we get reborn because we choose to. But if you don't consider that a choice, then that's just a way of speaking, and in that case, we don't. And so that's the Buddhist teachings on the afterlife, is that essentially our mind fares according to where it's attached and where it inclines to, but it has to match also the deeds, the intentions that have shaped and conditioned our mind, so that it can fare on a certain level. Kind of like if you have a radio station, there's a certain degree in which you can change the channel, but if the radio has only access to certain wavelengths of radio waves, then you can't actually hear and experience those other worlds that are beyond the range of the radio that you have. So you have to construct a radio with the appropriate conditions to experience particular channels. And then if you really want to, you can change the channel. So in the same way, if you construct with your intentions, if you shape your mind to be able to experience good or bad states, then wherever your mind is inclining to, wherever it's attached, that's where it will fare. And so that's just the basics of that.
Okay.
And Joe has a request. Can we request a translation of the Chant of Metta in Italian? Are you taking requests for Italian translations?
Well, I am not taking requests because I am not making any Italian translations. Ayasoma is making Italian translations, and she might be open to requests, keeping in mind that she already has a long agenda of suttas that she wants to translate into Italian for the benefit of the Italian Buddhist world. So it's possible that whatever you're requesting is already on her list of things to translate, and she'll get to it eventually. And if it's not on her list, it will probably get put on the bottom, which means it won't be happening anytime soon. So you can send requests to Ayasoma, but the actual effectiveness of those requests is doubtful.
I think the Metta Sutta is pretty likely, though, because that's...
I mean, it's probably on her list already, and it's one of the classics after all. And there's always terrible translations available, so good ones are hard to come by. In English as well, good ones are hard to come by.
Well, hopefully there's an accurate one soon. Okay, and Yongcho says, Bhante Sudaso, during your talk 2 weeks ago, you said the third noble truth is the most important one, at least according to my notes. I would have thought that the fourth is the most important. What am I missing?
Because what makes the fourth one important is that it leads to the third one. So the Noble Eightfold Path in and of itself is pointless. It's useful because it leads to the cessation of suffering. Otherwise, it's just a bunch of random arbitrary stuff. So why do we do the Eightfold Path? Because we want to get the cessation of suffering. So the third one is the most important because the third noble truth is actually what the goal of Buddhism is. The fourth one is the path, but the path is not the important thing. The destination is the important thing. The path is actually just another part of samsara, which is still bound up with dukkha. It's still bound up with delusion. As anyone who's been practicing Buddhism for a while knows, practicing Buddhism is full of dukkha. But what we're aiming at is the cessation of dukkha. So fortunately, we don't take refuge in the path, because, wow, that would be depressing, but rather in the goal of the path, which is the cessation of suffering.
And Sud says, Dear Venerables, what are some of these strategies to decrease papancha in everyday life? Is it to increase the amount of time one meditates in a day? Are there any traditional strategies that are taught?
Well, I mean, yeah, doing more meditation can help. But actually, one of the really important things for reducing papancha, for those who don't know, papancha is mental complication, mental proliferation, mental storytelling. One of the really important things is to reduce the intake of unnecessary information. And the truth is, 99.9% of the information we take in is unnecessary. So stop reading the news, stop listening to music, stop watching YouTube, except for Dhamma talks, those are okay. Everything else needs to go.
Might see all our viewers drop. Okay, no.
Yeah, so only Dhamma talks and Buddhist chanting, everything else has to stop. Stop reading fiction, stop watching movies, stop talking to people if you can. I'm really not kidding. It makes a big difference. The less conversation in your life, the better. Basically, reduce the input of noise, and you'll find your mind is less noisy. It's really incredible what a difference this makes. Like, people wonder, like, oh, why is my meditation so much better during retreat? Well, most of it is just because your mind is a lot quieter from not being, like, having all this noise crammed into it all the time. I mean, just sitting silently, you don't even need to know how to meditate. Just be in silence for a few days, and your mind will become quieter. It's really as simple as that. So, then there are things, again, so that's reducing the passive intake of external noise. The next thing is to reduce the internal production of noise. So, and this is, in fact, where meditation practice becomes very useful, is because a big part of meditation practice is learning how to take control of volitional thought formation. Learning how to take control of the deliberate creation of mental activities. So meditation practices are mostly about either stopping deliberate thought creation, or it's about creating only very specifically predetermined thoughts. For example, the thought, may everyone be happy, or Namo Buddhaya, or something like that. So deliberate thought formation with a specific intent of training the mind, or the cessation of deliberate thought formation. So either way, it's training the mind to be less noisy, to stop creating noise. So if you stop the external assault of noise, and you stop the internal creation of noise, then the mind will no longer be noisy. Okay?
And Jerry says, would you please talk about Viriya, specifically in etymological analysis, how to feed it and what to avoid to prevent starving it? We were talking about that.
Well, do you want to talk about it?
Sure. Okay, so Viriya, well, in etymological analysis, so as I believe Bante's probably mentioned on the live streams before, Viriya actually comes from the word Vira, meaning hero. So, for example, one of the epithets of the Buddha is he's the Vira, he's a Mahavira. And also that's the epithet for a leader of the Jain religion, one of them. So Vira means hero. It means, kind of like Odysseus or Gilgamesh, is that his name, I think?
Yeah.
Gilgamesh. So like these hero figures, right? And so in the suttas, there's also one of the useless forms of speech, which would count, like going back to Sud's question here, is talk about heroes, Vidakatha. So talk about heroes would be like telling stories about legendary heroes and their heroic efforts and so on. So Viriya is the quality of heroicism. So it's the quality of hero-ness, like heroicness. And so it's that quality of like when a hero is bravely conquering the dragon, right? Bravely going to save the day or whatever, and all these different stories of heroes and how they would go and do heroic things, right? So it requires intense effort, intense determination, bravery, energy. So you can't be kind of lazy and, oh, I'll get to it tomorrow, right? That's not what a hero does. A hero saves the day. They jump in and they save the day and they do what needs to be done and they do it with bravery.
So I'm thinking now of like the knight facing the dragon, and he's like, I'm just really not feeling this today. Yeah. Can we do this tomorrow?
Yeah, so stories about that night would not be told because he wouldn't have lived to tell the story. So yeah, so Viriya is a hero in that sense, and so Viriya is that quality of like heroism. So the way that it applies to Buddhist practice is with our defilements and Mara and so on. So like Mara is the dragon, or our defilements like anger and so on, anger and greed, and it's like, it's not like, oh, I'm feeling angry and greedy, but but rather we need to develop Viriya. And then you talk about how to feed it and what to avoid to prevent starving. And so actually one of the interesting things that the Buddha says about Viriya is he says that first mindfulness, and then mindfulness leading to Dhammavicya, investigation of Dhamma, leads to Viriya. So in the 7 factors of awakening, the Sattva Bodhanga, there's There's a sutta where he talks about these in actually a linear progression. And when he's talking about them in that way, he puts, obviously starting with mindfulness, this is the first of the awakening factors, and as someone develops mindfulness. But interestingly, in this sutta, the Buddha specifically defines mindfulness as recollecting teachings. So recollecting the Dhamma that one has learned. So by recollecting the Dhamma that one has learned, and then one investigates the meaning. So this is Dhammavicaya. It says one investigates the meaning. And so, for example, maybe you hear about the dangers of anger, the dangers of greed and discontent, or the dangers of papancha. And so you recollect a teaching that you've heard about it. And as you recollect it, you start to investigate, and the meaning of it starts to sink in, and you can develop inspiration and faith and a sense of willingness, like you get it and you want to do it now. But you feel inspired because it makes sense to you. So it's something that you can relate to in a rational way. And it's also motivating on an emotional level. And these are the two components of faith. So it's both makes sense to us, so we can be confident in it, and it's also emotionally inspiring and motivating on the level of the heart. And so faith and inspiration grow. And so then he says out of that comes Viriya, energy. Because it's kind of like, yes, this is what I need to do. This is possible. This is great. This is good. And I want to do it. And so then you feel that energy coming. And then out of the energy grows the other awakening factors in this case. So in that case, the Buddha actually says Viriya comes from understanding the Dhamma, investigating the Dhamma. Because it's kind of like, well, a dragon would seem really incredibly difficult to conquer. But if someone explains to you step by step how it's done, and you train step by step, and you see that process step by step how it could be done, then you'll have a lot of confidence and energy because it feels like it's possible. So in the same way, if you contemplate the Dhamma and you recollect the Dhamma, then you can get that confidence that it actually is worth doing, it is good, and it's possible. And that's one way of feeding Viriya. And then to avoid starving it, I would say probably at least what comes to mind to me in this moment is not falling into the traps of laziness. Because once you start falling in that trap, then you kind of have to crawl your way out of it. So I'd say maintaining a regular practice, so you have a kind of baseline, and that way hopefully you're experiencing some of the benefits of the practice. And so experiencing some of those benefits, it gives you that motivation. So if you fall into traps of laziness where you're not experiencing benefits and so on, then the mind can be demotivated because it won't be clear about the Dhamma. But if you can practice regularly and get some benefits, then you can start to recollect those with your mindfulness and investigate those, and then build up that energy again to continue practicing. I don't know about that.
That's good.
Okay, and then Joseph says, Ayakema teaches non-demanding patience. Also, the Metta Sutta says, not proud or demanding in nature. How would you practice if you are admonished as being demanding? Word in Pali, I think for demanding.
Oh, what are they translating as not proud or demanding in nature? It's probably not correct.
I think it's Mudu Anatimani, maybe, or I'm not sure.
Anatimani would be not conceited.
Yeah, so I think it's demanding is with the families, I think. Kusule.
Samechasako ujuchasu ujuchasu uchochas mudu anatimani santusukocha subarocha apakichocha salaguti. Subaro, maybe?
I thought it was Kusareso Nugito, like not greedy among families or something. I'm not sure though, actually.
I mean, it's often hard. I mean, as I said earlier, there's a lot of quite inaccurate translations of the Metta Sutta out there, so it can be challenging to try to figure out what people are mistranslating as what. So I don't know. Could try to track it down. Gabo? That might help, actually. We could look in the chanting book there. Anyway, if somebody accuses you of being demanding, well, ask yourself, are you demanding? Ask yourself, are you constantly asking or expecting from others more than you can reasonably expect? And the maximum that you can reasonably expect from other people is nothing. So if you are asking for more than nothing from other people, then you're being demanding. Which means you're probably demanding, if we're being realistic here. So instead of asking for things from other people, instead, you should look for opportunities to give to other people. Look for opportunities to support and help other people. And then what you'll find is that when you do that, there's a chance that they might then be more interested in helping and supporting you. Or they might not. So don't expect anything from them, because then you'll just be demanding again. So when being admonished by other people, the first thing to do is to always ask ourselves, is it true? Is what they're saying actually accurate?
This one doesn't have the translations, but okay. So this
That
is what
might
I
be
thought might
helpful.
be. I thought that's what they might be translating.
Apagabo, klesonegido. Well, apagabo, like not being, could be not proud. Ananugido just means not greedy.
Yeah.
Doesn't really have anything to do with being demanding necessarily. It's more just about not being greedy.
Yeah, I thought that it was lined up there, and like I thought that they had taken it as like when you're around families, not being demanding of them because you're not. That's what I. But I'm not.
Well,
Maybe I'm misremembering the translation.
Again, it's always hard to guess with these popularized loose translations.
Straightforward and gentle in speech.
I don't remember that
Can't remember right
translation.
now.
No. Anyway, again, when being admonished, the first thing is to ask yourself, is it true? You really examine your own mind and your own heart and your own conduct and ask yourself, is there truth in what they're saying? So if you're being admonished in accordance with Dhamma and it's true, then you should be grateful that somebody is showing you the next step on your path, and you should do what you can to take that step. That's the proper course. Those are my thoughts anyway. Okay?
Okay.
Let's move on.
And Mr. says, what happens to people that have lost their minds?
I don't think lost their mind is a technical term. Well, I actually know a few people who have had psychotic episodes at one point or another in their life, and the ones I know got better. And they're okay, more or less. So apparently it's not a permanent thing. Like everything else, fortunately, it's impermanent. It's not persistent. So what happens? I mean, if we wanted to put it in Buddhist terms, it's somebody who becomes so immersed in delusion that they lose touch with what we might call consensus reality. They're living in their own delusional world, which doesn't quite match up with what everybody around them is experiencing. So what do they need to do is they need to start practicing mindfulness and wisdom, ideally. Okay? Yeah.
I was just going to say that in terms of living in accordance with consensus reality, then I guess the Buddha lost his mind and he did okay.
Well, more it's that everybody else has lost their mind. In fact, they never had it in the first place.
Yeah.
Like, everybody else is crazy. It's just the Buddha happened to become sane.
And okay. Victoria says, what would you say is your current most inspiring simile for you at the moment? I've been reading through Bhikkhu Bodhi's Social and Communal Harmony Sutta compilation, and I find the expression of being solitary like a tusker in the woods instead of with fools such a beautiful and peaceful image.
Yeah, wow, that does sound lovely. Yeah, being alone in the woods instead of surrounded by fools. That sounds great. Yeah. Oh.
Do you have a favorite simile, Bante? Dhamma simile?
I'm actually thinking, and the sutras are just so full of delightful similes. So actually one that comes to mind is the one from the sutta this morning. How through associating with good people, that fulfills the conditions for hearing the true Dhamma, which then leads to, and the whole sequence leading to knowledge and liberation.
Like the rivers.
Yeah, it's the images of rain falling on the mountains and then filling up the creeks and the pools and the rivers and the lakes and all of it filling up the ocean. Yeah, it's a quite beautiful metaphor. So, and it's lovely also because sometimes our practice feels like just like little tiny drops. But the point is when you keep practicing, those little drops accumulate and build up and flow together until eventually it's enough to fill an ocean. So, yeah, I found that metaphor useful. What about you?
Yeah, there's a lot of similes.
Yeah.
I don't know if one comes immediately to mind. I mean, one does come to mind, but I don't know if it's my favorite, but I'll just say it anyway. And that's in the Parayana we haven't discussed it, but it's one where one of the disciples, Dhotaka, he says to the Buddha that he would wander as unimpeded or unobstructed like space. So he says, Yatahang akaso va vyapajamano ideva santo asito chireyang. so peaceful and without independent. He would wander right here like space almost, without any kind of obstruction or resistance. So I found that image kind of striking and interesting. Always comparing, just like space. But I don't know if that's my favorite simile, really. It's just one that I happen to have in my mind at the time.
I mean, one that's coming to mind for me is the simile from the Magandiya Sutta, which is very popular among monks, not so popular among lay people.
Which one is it?
So the simile in the Magandiya Sutta is of the person with a terrible skin disease, to the point where their skin is covered in extremely itchy, painful scabs. And because the person doesn't know any better, the way they try to deal with the discomfort is by scratching their skin until it starts bleeding, and then burning the wounds over the fire in order to try to get relief from the itchiness and pain of their skin disease. And the metaphor the Buddha is making here is for sensual desire. So the terrible skin disease is sensual desire, and scratching open your skin and burning it over a fire is like indulging your sensual desires, indulging your sensual urges. So, and then the metaphor the Buddha says, once that person gets treatment from a doctor and their skin disease is cured, then they would no longer have any interest in burning their limbs over a fire. Even if their former friends were dragging them to the fire to help them burn their arms, they would be fighting back. They'd be trying to resist. They wouldn't want to do that anymore. So in the same way, when one practices Buddhism, then one naturally starts to lose one's desire for sensual indulgence, because you recognize that what you thought before was pleasure is actually just torture. It's just self-torture. And the only thing that makes it seem pleasant is because the mind is literally diseased. The mind is diseased with sensual desire, which causes this distorted perception. This distorted perception that self-torture is actually pleasant. So Magadhiya Sutta, again, popular with monks, usually not so much with lay people.
Yeah. Is that the same as the coals, the embers on the leper?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, that's the one.
Okay,
Yeah, the lepers burning their skin with burning coals.
Yeah, I didn't remember the scratching part.
Yeah, they'd first scratch it to like rip open the flesh, and then they would burn it with fire.
It's graphic. On
Yeah.
YouTube. Yeah. Yeah. It's a good one.
Hey, it's Buddhism.
Yeah.
And they asked her metaphors. I mean, that one's very memorable.
It's a good one, yeah. Another one I actually like is okay, now there's different graphic ones coming to mind.
The Buddha was very graphic. It's actually one of the things I find so charming about the Buddha. The Buddha was like full-on R-rated, like gloves off. He was just like, here's the truth. Either you like it or you don't like it. You probably don't like it, but here it is anyway.
Oh, actually, okay, I'll give it, actually, can I give a good one and a bad one? Or a neutral one and a bad one? The neutral one I was having is there's...
Bad one and a worse one.
One, the Buddha gives the simile of a painter. I gave this on Sunday when we were talking. He gives the simile of a painter, and this one is kind of neutral, but I like this one because it's like very interesting and also very, very vivid. He says that a painter would use 5 different colored paints on like 3 canvases. So I think it's like the wall, a board, or a canvas. So there's 3 different mediums, and he has 5 different colored paints. And so the painter will draw the figure of a person on the thing. And this is a simile for rebirth. So like we are the painter, and we're drawing ourselves. We're painting with our actions, with the 5 aggregates, the 5 paints of our aggregates, and then the 3 realms of existence. So either sensual, form, or formless. So like we're kind of painting this figure of this person, and that's us. So like we're this painter. So I like that one. I get that one. And then the other one that the Buddha gives is, he says the nutriment of consciousness is like if a thief was taken and brought into by the king, caught, and the king would say, they would say, what should we do with the thief? And the king says to stab him with 100 spears 3 times a day. And as they stab him, then he comes back and says, how's that guy doing? He says, still alive, sir. And so then he orders them to keep stabbing him with 100 spears. So in and out, stab him with 100 spears. They say, how's that man? And in the evening, he says, still alive, sir. And then they order him to stab him with 100 more spears. And the Buddha says it's the same. Basically, it's a simile for like every time we get reborn in a new body. Like we get reborn, and it's just like getting stabbed with 100 new spears, morning, afternoon, and evening.
Yeah. See, yeah, the suttas are just so full of such delightful similes and metaphors. Another one that I like, whenever people say that they want to be reborn as an animal, they're always like, I want to be reborn as a cat, or I want to be reborn as an eagle or something. Well, there's actually a metaphor the Buddha gives for being reborn as an animal. And so he gives the imagery of, imagine that there's a person who's stumbling through the desert, they're exhausted, they're dehydrated, and then they fall face first into a cesspool. That's what it's like to be reborn as an animal. Yep, good times. Okay, next question.
Very direct. Okay.
I love Buddhism.
Young says, what are the possible causes of a human being to be reborn in the animal realm? Since it is so difficult to be reborn as a human being from the animal realm.
Do you want to talk about this?
Okay, yeah, what are the possible causes of a human being to be reborn? Okay, so causes. So number one would be not following the 5 precepts. This is something the Buddha says. So if you essentially decide intentionally to be going around killing living beings and to be stealing what doesn't belong to you and to be telling deliberate, the third one is sexual misconduct. So breaking boundaries of consent, like cheating on your partner and breaking consensual boundaries, and also telling deliberate lies, and then also clouding and dulling your mind with diluting, intoxicating substances. Then the Buddha says that is one of the reasons that beings will be reborn in the lower realms. So that would include animals. So that could be anything from animal, from like Fuzzy, Teddy in the monastery, to mosquitoes and fruit flies, to also down to like ghosts, tormented ghosts, so petas, or even in hell. So there's all the lower realms, but animal would be included in that. And then actually there's another trick. If you want to be reborn as an animal, the Buddha actually says how to do it. And so there were the case of the the dog duty ascetic and the ox duty ascetic.
I prefer dog vow.
Okay, dog vow. Yeah, okay, dog vow ascetic. So there was an ascetic at the time who was behaving like a dog, and the idea behind this was basically that we can assume this is a kind of penance. So it is like by humbling themselves and by doing this very difficult, painful practice of behaving like a dog and acting like a dog and so on, that they would be essentially, it would be like a punishment for their sins, and by doing this, they believed that they would be reborn in heaven. So this was a kind of vow they took in order to essentially punish themselves and do something very difficult to be reborn in heaven. And when the Buddha talked about this, he said that actually best case scenario, by behaving like a dog, acting like a dog, taking a vow to live like a dog, they would be reborn as a dog. Worst case scenario, they'd be reborn in hell. So that's one way, but
And
not recommended.
The same for the cow vow ascetic. Like if you act like a cow, then you might be reborn as a cow. So so think, what is it that animals are characterized by? They're characterized by impulsivity. They're characterized by spontaneity, by following their instincts all the time. So if you act very impulsive and instinctive, constantly just doing whatever you feel like doing the moment you feel like doing it, then that means you're acting like an animal and are much more likely to be born as an animal. Okay, let's keep going.
Okay. So Jos has a question. What do you think of this quote? Everyone is unshakably good, no exceptions, and everyone belongs to one another, no exceptions. Father Greg Boyle, founder of Homeboy Industries.
Very cute, not very Buddhist.
He says, Homeboy is the largest gang rehabilitation center in the world. One of Father Boyle's terms for compassion and empathy is having affectionate awe for what others have to carry.
Yeah, very cute, not very Buddhist. People are not unshakably good. And nobody belongs to anybody or anything. So both quotes, I see their usefulness, but both of them from a Buddhist standpoint are incorrect. Both of them are wrong view. Maybe you want to talk about that.
But I would maybe add that that I feel one way of spinning this in a Buddhist way is saying that no one is unshakably bad.
Ooh,
so rather than
good.
saying
like
everyone is unshakably good, like what is the intention here?
Mm.
Because you're saying it's a gang rehabilitation center, probably the intention is to say that these people, it's to encourage them, like, you're not a bad person.
Mm.
You're not intrinsically bad. You're not unshakably bad. So that actually is true in Buddhism. Like, no one is unshakably bad. No exceptions. Even Devadatta, if you know the story of Devadatta. So even he's not unshakably bad. He just made bad choices.
Really bad choices.
Yeah. But those choices are not who he is. They're just a series of conditions which arose and have consequences, but they're not who he is. So he's not unshakably bad. And then also, everyone belongs to one another. Another way of taking it is, like Bhante said, actually, no one belongs to anyone, which maybe doesn't sound as warm and fuzzy, but I guess there's probably a way that's good. Like, for example, you're not controlled by anyone. You're not in the sense of like you're not the property of anybody. So you can make your choices and you have no one is dictating your life, basically. So I feel that's a positive thing, in terms of rehabilitation. So I feel like the intentions of that are probably in line with Buddhist principles of reforming to become an ethical person and so on, and not being mired in self-denigration.
Yeah, actually, the everyone belongs to one another, what it makes me think of is the sutta from the Samyutta Nikaya, where the Buddha says that basically everyone you meet at some point used to be your mother, your father, your sister, your brother, your daughter, your son, your husband, your wife, your best friend. Like, he just goes through this long list of relations, and he's like, everyone you meet has been these in the past. So that would be a way of relating to that. So you meet someone and it's like, this is my mother. Why would I mistreat my mother? Why would I steal from my brother? Why would I hurt my own daughter? Why would I mistreat my best friend? So you relate to everyone in that way. For me, it's cats. Like, I meet someone and I'm like, if this was my beloved cat, would I mistreat them? Definitely not. In fact, I'd probably give them hugs, little buddy. Okay. Okay. Yeah, this is the only way I can do metta. Okay. Now I'm imagining you as a cat.
This person's name is Cow's our friend, so be careful there. Okay.
I've always wanted to have a cow as a friend, actually.
Yeah.
I keep telling Ayasoma that we should rescue a cow. One of these days she'll agree.
Okay. I don't know who they are.
Only cats. Soon a cow. Let's see.
They say it's been a while. I don't know who this person is.
They used to join our live streams regularly.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, welcome back. Okay, Rebecca says, it seems like one can associate with good people, but that might not necessarily lead toward hearing the true Dhamma. It seems so hard to get the right conditions for eliminating our ignorance. Can you explain more about this?
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I thought this was about Dhamma Tathasana.
Oh, well, it was about the sequence of, associating with Sappurisa leads to hearing Saddhamma and so on. Okay.
So, yeah, you're saying it seems like it's difficult to get the right conditions, and it might not necessarily deteriorate. Yeah, so, well, one thing that's worth pointing out is that often in the suttas, when the Buddha says associating with Sappurisa, of course, we can apply that to, it is important to associate with good people, and elsewhere the Buddha does say that, so that actually is true, the Buddha's advice. But often when he's talking about, in the context of hearing the Dhamma, he's talking specifically about Buddhist, usually about, advanced Buddhist practitioners, or Buddhist people who are experienced in good. So, in the context of, by associating with them, you hear the Saddhamma. Because someone might be like a great person, a great Christian, but they might have wrong view. So it's good to associate with good people and ethical people, and we shouldn't necessarily exclude people from our life. We should have compassion and so on, and have good influences. But in that sequence, he's really, I would say, in my opinion, he's talking about Buddhist people, Buddhist practitioners, who are good and so on, and who are trustworthy. And that's why associating with them would lead to hearing the true Dhamma. Not hearing, for example, a sermon about how Jesus is your Lord and Savior. So even though good people, ethical people, they might be Christian, it doesn't mean we'll hear the good Dhamma from them. And so, in terms of getting the conditions for it, I mean, yeah, it is hard to get the right conditions for eliminating our ignorance. It is difficult. I would say that's one of the importances of reading the suttas, though. Like, by reading the suttas, although it's not perfect, because I know a ton of people who read the suttas and, yeah, they have weird ideas about them and so on. So it's just because you read them doesn't mean that it's a ticket to hearing the true Dhamma. But it's really close. It's one of the closest ways you can get to hearing the true Dhamma, because you're in contact. So at that point, it comes down to how receptive are you to it, in a way. So it's one of the closest ways you can get, and it's one of the most certain ways you can get that are available. It's not the most certain, because there really isn't one, but it's one of the most certain that you can get, and that's reading the suttas. And then ideally, reading the suttas thoroughly and practicing and really reflecting on them. Like reflecting on them in a way that's not just absorbing the information, but turning that back on yourself and saying like, how is this visible to, how is this able to be seen in my experience? So really trying to see like, this is pointing to a reality, and how can I see that? And then practicing accordingly, and then going to monastics and Buddhist practitioners who are ethical and have practiced and so on, and who are learned in those teachings, and then asking them questions and learning from them with an open mind. I would say that that's probably the most realistic way, because you can't necessarily know who is a Sappurisa in the sense of who is telling the truth and so on. I don't know if
that's good. Yeah.
Okay, and Amaranta says, Venerables, how do you deal with a person that is narcissist and has power and makes everything to make feel bad coworkers using her knowledge about them? Got more specific as we went. I practiced metta and gave her a meditation book.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think that's just about the best you can do. So you cannot change other people. What you can do is you can change your own attitude towards other people. So you can't change your coworker. What you can do is purify your own mind of hostility towards your coworker. And that's done through metta practice. Giving her a meditation book is a good gift. It might actually help her, or it might not. But practicing metta, you know for sure, will help yourself to stop having hostility towards this coworker. So I think you've already done what can be done. Yeah, be really nice to her, give her gifts. Don't be mean to her. Encourage other people to also be patient and tolerant with her. Those are things which might start to make a difference over time. But realistically, the most important thing is purifying your own heart of any hostility towards this person. Ideally, cultivate compassion for them, because this person is probably creating a lot of bad karma for themselves without even realizing it. So have compassion for them. Okay? And it looks like that's the last question.
Yeah.
So I think we'll go ahead and conclude it this time. So another wonderful monk chat with all of your wonderful questions, and we look forward to seeing you next time. So we'll end with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu.